AskReddit by no second 7603. What's the creepiest thing that's happened to you personally that made you question reality? Heard my mother yell for me from the kitchen of my house one morning. My mom wasn't at my house. It was 5 AM. She was asleep at her own place. I looked up from my PC game. My dog, who was chilling in the entrance to my bedroom, his hackles were raised and he was growling towards the kitchen. There was nothing there when checked, but what the fuck? I'm not a believer in paranormal or religious demon ghost shit. But I have no idea what this was, and I don't think I imagined my name being called. I heard it clear as anything in my mom's voice. My dog was instantly tuned as soon as it happened. Nothing delayed on his part. Maybe it could have been cross-universe interference leaking over. This happened to my mom and I too. My older sister called out to my mother from the kitchen. It was clear as day and she said, "Mom." Moom. My mom and I both spun around and looked at each other, confused. My sister lives in Florida and we are in Ohio. It happened again to me about 5 days later when I was alone. But this time it was one of the foster kids looking for my mom. She said, "Grandma and I went to go see what she wanted, but she was upstairs sleeping soundly in her bed." Very weird. Not the weirdest thing that's happened in that house though. I don't know if this counts, but my grandfather recently passed, and the night of I was taking care of him. At around 2 AM I was hearing, or thinking, it's hard to describe, numbers in my head. 529, 529. It kept repeating for a few minutes. I was so sleep deprived I didn't think much of it other than just lack of sleep. Around 5 AM he asks me to get my grandmother. She was sleeping, we were on shifts, and I start to go get ready for bed. After I finish up I go grab water from the kitchen and my grandma comes in and tells me it happened. I look at the time she texted the nurse who was meant to come check on him later in the day. 529. After everything settled I remembered what I was thinking earlier that night and it still freaks me out. It's only taken place maybe a half dozen times, but things happening in real life after having dreamed the same thing. Sometimes it's years apart and it doesn't feel at all similar to deja vu. I've had this happen myself before, but my mom has this so strongly. One example, my grandmother and her husband lived a few states away from us. My grandmother died and we had a difficult relationship with grandmother's husband. A couple years later, during which time we had no contact with or news about him, my mom and I are talking early one morning and she says, "I think grandmother's husband died last night. Just a feeling." Well, that night, my uncle called and, sure enough, the man had unexpectedly died the night before. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't been there myself. I had a reoccurring dream of a place. It was a ramshackle alley. Then I found that place. The second that I drove by, I stopped, parked, and went in. I knew that place to the nails in the boards, and the second floor porch. I had never been to that town before, but it had my IRL name on it. It was never a bad dream, just reoccurring and odd, in that it was not a type of place that I had ever seen. Huh, that's odd. Got a phone call from a private number. I missed the call and got a voicemail. It was my brother, who was in prison at the time, and calling from the prison phone, and my mom having a part of a conversation. So I texted my mom and said sorry I missed the phone call, but hope her and brother were well. She had no clue what I was talking about. She hadn't spoken to my brother at all that day. To this day, I have no idea why a private number called me and left an old recording of my brother and mother speaking. I get really weirded out thinking about who would have been on the other end if I answered. I even have the voicemail still. It was really bizarre, and I genuinely have no explanation for it. I would wake up at the top of the steep staircase of my childhood home as a kid, feeling like I could jump and I'd be okay and just float to the bottom. Then I'd snap out of it and go back to bed. Found out years later that my sisters had the same experiences, but we never shared at the time. Weird even if it was a recurring dream. Can't explain it. I had this dream as a child. It's apparently really common. The main variation being that people insist they were awake for it and others insist it was a dream. In my case it was a vivid dream that I remember having a couple of times. You should Google it and see how much comes up about it. It's super strange but cool. The building of my apartment is parallel to another building of the same type. The apartments can see the windows of the opposite apartments very easily. One evening, already dark, I look out my window and see some other windows with light. I see a person looking out of it, rather a shadow. When I close my left eye it's gone. When I look with my right eye or both, it's there. Some further testing that evening it appeared my eye just broke light in a weird way that day. I was at the hospital getting a dose of intravenous iron, which takes about an hour. I laid back in the chair with my eyes closed and dozed off for a while. I woke up, but remained completely still, my eyes still closed. I felt that someone was looking at me and popped my eyes open. Standing directly beside me was some guy, 30ish maybe, shaggy brown hair, brown plaid shirt, untucked, brown corduroy looking pants. He seemed very surprised to see that I noticed him and he instantly disappeared with a slight popping sound. This literally happened less than a week ago and I'm still trying to make sense of it. I'm leaning towards an extremely vivid dream, but I don't know. I just don't know what else it could be. It was nobody that I knew or had ever seen before. Time traveling creep? I walked past a mirror in my basement, and it looked like a man covered in mud was screaming at me, but there was no noise. I saw on my peripherals and it looked right at him and I remember just staring at him. I ran upstairs. It never happened again. This just gave me the most unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. Definitely some creepy shit going on down there. I'm gonna think about this next time I go into my own basement. I used to be very skeptical about paranormal activity, but that completely changed after I met my high school best friend. Her house was definitely haunted. The first thing I began to notice was the bruising. Every time I stayed over I would get random bruises, which I didn't think much of at first because I am a person that bruises quite easily. But then the X marks scratches started to appear when I'd stay over. That shit started to creep me out, but apparently not enough because I continued to have sleepovers at her place. Until one night it was just me and her because her parents went on vacation and let her stay home. It was getting late and I was always the last to fall asleep. Once I started to drift off I was awoken by a loud deep male grunt, and footsteps coming from the hallway towards the room we were in. Once they got closer it stopped. I couldn't move a muscle and I was on student exchange in Germany, on the other side of the world from my family. One night, I was getting ready for bed when I very clearly heard my mother's voice calling my name. It was real enough for me to immediately stop what I was doing and look around for the source of the voice, but there was nothing that I could see. The radio and the TV that were in my room was off and the voice had clearly come from inside the room, not outside. Since then, over 20 years ago, there have been a couple of times where I've been alone and I've heard a voice like it was right next to me, with no obvious source. Did you ever call the person whose voice you were hearing? The night my cousin died from COVID, as I arrived to his house to help, I saw a woman in a white dress carrying white flowers leaving his house going down the stairs that led to his house main door. I was the only one I saw it, and to this day I don't know what it was. I've had lots of creepy things happen to me, but I don't think I've shared these to here. I worked at a vet clinic that was built in an old house, historic neighborhood, couldn't tear it down or redo the outside. One night, I was getting everything ready to leave for the night. I was by a window, and I saw a man walk by the window. My first thought was that someone was skulking around outside, all female staff. So the man definitely wasn't an employee, but then I realized I was on the second floor. There was no possible way for a man to walk past the windows the way I saw. Turns out my co-workers had seen similar things. At the same clinic, when you walked upstairs at night it would sometimes sound like someone was running up the stairs after you. It was creepy. Another time, When I was a preteen early teenager, I got off my bed to walk to the bathroom before stopping in front of my TV because something on the TV caught my eye. After a second or two of standing there, I felt a strong urge to move to the side, so I did. As soon as I moved, a doll fell off of my shelf, an antique doll my grandmother's grandmother made, and landed right where I had been standing. It was very odd. IDK about creepy, but one time I got the whittle in one. I deviated from the usual first guess, slate, just to change things up. I guessed prime, which was correct. At the time I shrugged it off as a lucky coincidence and went to work. But thinking about it later, it seemed more and more unlikely that the one day I changed up my pattern it happened to be the right answer. My husband once got whittle in one. He woke up just knowing what the word was. He said he didn't dream it, but he just knew. The word was lapse. Weird. Months ago, I found out my uncle was dying from thyroid cancer. He was in a bad shape, couldn't talk for too long, couldn't swallow his food and had to stay in bed. I think he was in stage 4. Apparently he was suffering from it for a while now, yet my aunt didn't tell my family because she didn't want my family dragged into it. A few days have passed, and I came across one of those biblically accurate angels videos. It was one that I have seen several times now, however this one was different. I felt warmth and comforted as I watched it, and when I turned the screen off, I felt wings embracing me from behind. I soon fell asleep afterwards. When I woke up, I had missed calls from my dad. Apparently my uncle had passed away a few hours earlier. Someone developed an unhealthy fixation on me and started discussing causing me physical harm and even hiring someone to murder me on their private Twitter account. Creepy as fuck. I hope you contacted the police. One night I wanted to fall asleep, laying on my side, and felt a hand on my back between my shoulders. Till this day, I'm sure it was a missensation and there was no hand and no ghost. But what creeps me out till today is my reaction to the situation. Yes, I was scared. But somehow also weirdly calm, too. Like I knew this hand was no person but something else that didn't want to hurt me. I'm still questioning my sanity. There are stories of people, alone in the woods, hearing singing and following the songs to their demise. Many of those stories talk about fairies and the wee folk. I was solo backpacking camping in the Uncanny wilderness in Colorado. It was night, the wind was blowing, some rain splattering down. I am not at all spiritual, I do not believe in the mystical, but I heard singing. The words were indistinct, but the sound was if a choir was singing off in the distance, but still also not too far away. Strong and resonant with many layers of tone and inflection. I felt a need to get out of my sleeping bag, my tent, and find out who was singing. I fought it, remembering the stories. I didn't go, but I still remember it. Calling. My mother used to collect clowns, and I don't mean small ceramic ones, like some that were legit 3-foot standees. When I was around 11-12, I woke up from my bed one night to find that same clown staring at me either dead center of my room. I used to think that one of my cousins did it, until I remember that it was just me, my mom, and stepdad in the house that night. So unless one of them moved it, or one of my cousins just randomly showed up to screw with me, I to this day do not know how it got there. I'm kind of surprised I still don't have nightmares about it. In high school I woke up in the middle of the night to my laptop making the incoming Skype call ring. Very confused and panicking, my family would wake up and question me about the noise. I got out of bed to try and see what was going on. Laptop screen was black and best I could remember I had shut it off earlier. Closed the laptop and the noise shut off. Never did figure out what caused it to start ringing. One night when I was about 12 or so I heard something like scratching coming from outside my bedroom door. It was late and I was awakened to hear almost the sound of a tree branch slowly going against my door. No trees outside my window. Everyone else asleep. It was about 5 scratches. I don't believe in supernatural stuff at all, but that was fucked up. I sat under my covers hoping it would go away. Still think about that. I'm not gonna be able to explain this right, but one time I was trying to fall asleep in a new house, but every time I shut my eyes I'd feel my body float up to the ceiling and I'd open my eyes and be looking down at myself. This happened roughly 20 times in a row before it stopped. I've had this happen a few times as well. It's so bizarre, isn't it? Out of body experience. I have a complicated relationship with religion. At the moment I don't practice. But I always felt maybe something was following me or cursed. Anyway, I had a lady pray over me while she drew my blood. It was quite unsettling. Saw a purely pitch black shadow-like man with a top hat standing in the corner of my room for a second. A few months later, my friends came over for a sleepover, and one of them saw a pitch black shadow-like creature run into my room on all fours. One of them said, "Did you see that?" and the other replied, "Yes." I'm no longer in that house, but I still think about these moments a lot. I put some shoes together in a room, went to the ensuite to the toilet, came out and one of the shoes was pointing in the other direction. Only me in the house. I really can't figure out how that would happen or why. It was literally about 1 minute in between. The reason I know exactly how I put them is because I put them in front of the mirror and thought if you were naked and invisible and wearing shoes, you'd look just like that. So I'm 100% certain of how I left them. No one believes me though.